that you brought up communities of color in particular. I know for me personally, just thinking about like some of the conversations that I've had with my grandpa, for instance, who had very much not only grown up, but served in and then ultimately saw the end of a segregated community and what it meant to cast his vote and kind of the initial vitriol and pushback that would come from some of those initial experiences. And it's amazing to me that we're having honestly similar conversations in different circumstances, but that's the history that we're really speaking back to. Some of the other components here, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality that there are a few people making very critical decisions for the masses. And there is this component that we have to lean into and discuss, regardless of party, that there are individuals that carry your vote and your voice. And right now, they have the opportunity to do incredible change and really make this space of democracy so different, so open, and so inclusive. Or the exact opposite. We're at two ends of the spectrum and very much an impasse in this moment around democracy. Next slide, Cece. Awesome. Is Anne on with us? I don't think I see her, but I want to make sure that I don't miss her. All right. Well, let me lean into Anne's story. Anne is from the Ohio River Valley, and in this region, folks are still suffering, and many have died from poisoned water. The chemical C8 has been found in prevalence in the water supply. And she organized her community after it was revealed that DuPont, which is a corporation, knowingly dumped C8 and is still fighting against these powerful interests that aren't held accountable. The component to lift out of here, ladies and gentlemen, is that because there are folks with vested interests, if they have the means, they can dictate their access to the messaging right now. They can be influential and they can be persuasive in these spaces. And For the People Act has a component in its legislation that really drives home that we want to get dark money out of politics, really shine light on who is investing in these spaces. And we do this, we accomplish this in legislation by no more secret spending in these elections. We want to ensure that our candidates from underrepresented groups and even our popular candidates can run for office without the support of big money donors. We're looking for a space that suddenly isn't the barrier to entry and ultimately could lend itself to a more representative government. And then last, it calls for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Now, what is Citizens United? Very frankly, it's the big dollar donors that are engaging in this space. Harking back to a point that we made in the very beginning, this has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, which should baffle you, because here in the state of West Virginia, we have single-digit number of millionaires in the state, let alone folks that are making above $45,000 a year. It's our median income, and honestly, that's generous in and of itself. And so to think that millions, even billions, are being flooded in spaces just like ours to influence elections should very much put up a red flag for folks like you and I, and frankly, across the country. It shouldn't be the money that talks. It should be our representation that does the speaking for us. Next slide, Cece. So this is where we get into kind of the tough love conversation there's a number of challenges in our democracy right now. We know that, we feel it. We felt it for a number of cycles now, but then just looking at names and friends that are on our screen today, and then I'm sure folks that are listening in across our social media channels, you've been in the game longer than I have, right? A young activist, young politician, and a young woman of service. You've seen so much more than I have. And so you've seen the transformation of our spaces, whether it is for more progress, for more inclusivity, or even some very scary and alarming events that have occurred just as recently as January. We have to steer into this. We have to acknowledge the light with the dark. We have to acknowledge that we do have some opportunities and challenges to face. And so this part of the conversation is really going to hone in on those components. With that said, we already know this, but the top line is our democracy inherently was drafted and crafted for individuals of affluence that were male and that were white heteronormative. These were the individuals that had drafted a lot of the constitutional rules that would ultimately really steer this space. And as we know, kind of their limited purview doesn't necessarily translate as we really think about how our communities are whole and big and diverse. And we have to adjust accordingly in order to make sure that our democracy is fully indicative of its people. And so when we think about that, we also can see that it lends itself to being persuaded and being contaminated by individuals that have a vested self-interest, not necessarily a space of service, but that is the premise that we look for in representation, in governance, that it is service above self. It is the collective voice over the few and the powerful. And that's how we shape legislation and policy and law that ultimately provides opportunity. That's what this is all about. And so when we think about our space right now and how we want to really influence this and elevate voices, how do we want to do that? How do we want to take these things that we know have been part of our history and transform it into something that truly lifts up voices, secures our elections, and allows for folks to really exercise that power at the ballot box? Next slide, Cece. So then we want to get into a conversation about story. Now, why is this important? We've talked a lot about what For the People Act and ultimately what the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is supposed to accomplish. But we also understand that right now we're in a space that feels incredibly divided. We also recognize that sometimes that politics feels very volatile. It feels like a hot button topic, whatever the case may be, whatever our stance is. And if we're looking to make change, if we're looking to push this type of legislation forward, we have an opportunity to actually unify, which is incredible. It's a cool thing. And we can do that. We can accomplish that with a tool. And that tool is our personal story, our personal narrative. So why is this important? Talking about real folks, just like BJ, when we talk about our lived experiences and our stories and how we got to this space, it humanizes the issue. It makes it tangible. We can see it and touch it and feel it. And we can also equate policies and facts to lived experience. So folks are more likely to remember why we need change because they're living it, because they know a friend that's lived it, because they're seeing it and touching it. And then it's ultimately easier and more understandable, a little bit more accessible to react to those things when you know that they affect a real person's lived experiences, not just your own, but the folks that are in your community, in your state. So stories depoliticize an issue. I actually just had this experience, not even really delving into the policy itself, but speaking to a group of students that over the years I've had the opportunity to speak with and mentor. And it means a lot to me because they're a group that is centered in my hometown. But in hearing the name of the policy, we had advisors that felt like we had gotten too political and too partisan, even though partisanship wasn't ever mentioned. And in that, I was told that I was not allowed to speak to that group anymore, and that that advisor quit because they felt that we had gotten into a volatile, divisive space. What we should draw from that, even as much as it hurt to see that type of feedback, especially knowing that this is one of those issues that's incredibly unifying, is that there are folks that see the top lines and the titles and they affiliate it with partisanship. I could say they affiliate it with a couple of other things too, triggering some other components. But I think what we can delve into, assuming positive intent, is that when we share our story and share our lived experience, it's not even about the partisanship. That's not part of the conversation. What is being lifted up, though, is how you as an individual, your families, your communities now get to engage in this space and hone a right that is yours, and how you can make sure that other folks have that right as well. And so we have an opportunity to really speak to the issue in a way that resonates, that emotes, that's heart driven. And it's not even about winning. It's very much about defending the rights of you and your fellow man. So then stories can ultimately open the door. It opens that space and it opens that conversation and allows for you to connect with individuals that perhaps you didn't think you had anything in common with prior. It really hones into the concept of being able to reach across, if you want to call it the aisle, and be able to see that individual as your neighbor, as your friend, and the overarching identifiers of politics don't necessarily apply. It is very much allowing for folks to have that common ground and then ultimately fight for the opportunity to exercise that right together. It's an awesome moment. And it's a great way to open a dialogue in spaces that it has been increasingly gridlocked and hard to do, especially in the past couple of years. Next slide, Cece. So why do you care about democracy? And I want you to take a few minutes and think about why protecting our democracy, making it more open and inclusive, and really allowing for this to be open for all Americans, why that's important to you, and why on a Thursday night, you wanted to be here to learn how to really express that story of self. And if you support For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which I feel that you do, that's why you're here today, learning a little bit more. What story can you tell to really connect with others? And why is that so important to you? Why is this moment so important to you? So just take a few minutes to think that through. And I know that ultimately we'll want to do breakouts in order to really delve into this and kind of workshop this with some new friends on the chat today. I love this. All right. Cece, I think that's the last slide, correct? Great. So, ways to tell your story. As you're thinking this through, I want to give you some extra tools in the toolbox, some methods as we get ready to do this breakout and to really not only sharpen our craft, but then make some new friends this evening. So a powerful story is really driven by your experiences, but the emotions attached to those experiences. It's the way that we emote in order to connect with another individual. It's a way that you as a human can really empathize with another individual or group of individuals. If you have these stories and it's not your own story, you want to make sure to ask permission to use that story, because in my mind, not only is this a powerful tool, it's sacred. It's a lived experience and it matters. And so you want to make sure that that experience that you're sharing with another, if it's not your own, that you do have permission to speak to it and bring that forward. The average story is truly one that comes from the heart. And I've said this a few times over, but it's really one that I want to double down on, because when we talk about the story of self, and we'll get into that in just a minute, it really is one that's coming from a genuine place and something that that's resonated with you, that you feel so deeply that it can connect with another. In this case, or the example that we use, a person who works 2 jobs, has kids or elderly family to care for, and can't vote without early voting on a weekend, or no excuse absentee. And so in this frame, particularly when we talk about voting rights, this story isn't unlike the experiences of many of us. We know that particularly in our state, it is not uncommon to be working multiple jobs to just barely get by. It's not uncommon for a student to be working full time to go to class and to care for a family member or even their own child. There's a lot that goes into the average day of a West Virginian, and being able to exercise your vote, we want to make sure that you have every opportunity to do so. And so without weekend or no excuse absentee, how could that individual whose voice absolutely deserves to be heard, how could that individual be able to participate if the system isn't open to being sure that they have that opportunity, right? So we want to make sure that that's preserved and protected, and then it really relates back to components of this particular bill. Some of the components that I tend to train on when it comes to speaking to story of self, in order to break it down in a concise way, in a way that guides you, I like to break it down into 3 components: the story of me, the story of we, and the story of now. And what does that mean? Well, story of me is your personal lived experience, right? And so we started that. We really touched on that to begin with. How we translate that to the collective, to our community, and how that connects with others is the story of we. And then ultimately you transition into the story of now, which is, how do we act in this moment? How can we impact change? How do we move this thing forward? How do we go from just talking about it to doing something about it? And having that kind of model as you're working through this with your new friends this evening, it helps like draw it in and make it clear and concise. And also, if you are ever in that moment where you have to kick it with a little bit of an elevator pitch, you've got a way to pare it down in a way that you can grab folks' attention and get the job done. Ultimately, you want to connect in a genuine fashion in a way that's heart-driven. All right, Cece, we ready to break out?
Yes, we are. So yeah, we're gonna take a few minutes here and we're gonna break out with some partners, and then we can start talking through